It may well be the start of spring for us meteorologists. However, there is definitely still some wintry weather to talk about, especially as we go into next week. Let's start with what's going on at the moment, because the jet stream is doing interesting things high up in the atmosphere. It's kind of bending down to the south, and then we have this arch across the UK. There is a dip in it further south as well, a branch of the jet stream which is generating low pressure and the wet and windy and wintry weather over the Balearics. But for the UK, we've got this, as I say, arching or ridging as the jet stream moves up over Greenland and Iceland. If we run through the next 5 or 6 days, well, we start to lose that dip in the jets across the Mediterranean. But the broader pattern, although the jet starts to strengthen behind me coming out of North America, is we've still got this arch close by to the UK. But instead of the UK being in the middle of the arch, that whole arch has kind of shifted out to the west. And that means that the pressure patterns at the surface will also be shifting to the west. If we rewind the clock and put the pressure pattern on, under this jet stream arcing like that, we have this big area of high pressure. It's been dominating our weather for a number of days and will continue to do so. But as we run through the next 5 or 6 days, as the jet stream shifts, so that high pressure is likely to start just gradually to drift up towards Greenland and Iceland. And that will affect our weather patterns as we head into next week in particular. But certainly for the short term, with high pressure dominating close by, it's going to be kind of more of the same. Yes, we've seen quite a few showers around during Wednesday, but they'll be easing off and most places looking pretty dry through the rest of this week. Often fairly cloudy and with a chilly feel, but of course the cloud makes such a difference at this time of year where we see the March sunshine. It'll feel pleasant enough, but of course where we have clear skies at night, that will continue to allow things to turn rather frosty. It's during this weekend that we start to see something of a change. The high pressure still in control of our weather, but just edging a little further westwards. And as it does so, it just opens the door to northerly winds, and they will bring colder air south across all parts of the country during the course of Saturday and more particularly into Sunday. So it is going to turn colder. Temperatures this weekend, single figures as maximum, by Sunday, well, below average almost across the board, probably only 5 to 7 Celsius, whereas 7 to 10 would be more typical. So colder, and when you add on that wind, which will be quite noticeable in the east, temperatures are going to be feeling closer to freezing. So a bit of a significant wind chill on those North Sea coasts in particular. So it is going to turn colder this weekend, but with high pressure nearby, still largely dry. We will see, I think, a few more showers developing on that northerly wind through the weekend, but we are expecting them to be mostly of rain at this stage. Chance of some snow, certainly on the Scottish mountains where we see any showers. And for most places, the weekend will be dry, but probably still fairly cloudy. What happens then as we go into next week? Well, by this stage, the high is starting to drift a little further away and therefore opening the door to these northerly winds and the cold flow for Sunday. But just look here, there's a little area of low pressure developing in the northerly flow. And that could be significant, drifting southwards. Now, we've got the cold air in place, but what this low could do is inject some moisture. And of course, for any sleet or snow, you do need that combination. So that's something to watch. Not all the computer models agree with the position or intensity of this low, but it does increase the chance of some sleet and snow into the northeast in particular by the time we get to Monday. And by this stage, of course, if we put the jet stream back on, it is now sitting close to the UK. These are the winds high up in the atmosphere, but a little bit of a kink in the jet stream may generate that low pressure to increase the number of wintry showers coming into the northeast. So that is something we need to keep a close eye on. Early part of next week, the potential for more wintry weather coming in from the northeast. It is still going to be cold wherever you are. After that, what happens? Well, it's going to be a case of watching whether the high pressure completely slinks away and allows low pressure to move in, or whether the high kind of holds some kind of resistance across the UK. This plot shows from lots and lots of computer models the potential pressure scenarios as we go through next week. A lot of red, solid red, the same pressure pattern being signaled by all the charts, all the models for the next few days until we get into the weekend. And then for next week, notice we are going to start to see a shift, a different flavour of our weather, with more likely to see low pressure systems getting involved, and they are more likely to inject perhaps a little bit of moisture, which combined with the cold air could make things more interesting. And we are most likely to hang on to northerly winds as we go through certainly the middle part of next week. This plot shows the wind direction, or most likely wind direction. Previous computer model runs going down the side here, the forecast days ahead there along the top. Green is kind of neutral, that's what we've got at the moment with high pressure sitting over us, but blue suggesting more of a northerly flow, and that's what we've got as we go through the early to middle part of next week, before perhaps a signal, albeit a weak one, quite a pinky colour there, not the dark reds, of something perhaps then turning a bit milder as we go through the back end of next week and into the following week. What does all that mean? Well, it does mean that the colder air is likely to hang on as we go through next week. And this is the most likely scenario for our pressure. That high is going to continue to drift away, but still have quite an influence on things. That low coming down the North Sea, or another one following in, likely to be somewhere to the east, perhaps introducing more showers in the flow to the east. But there is also another possibility that if the low just slinks away a little further north, it may allow another area of low pressure to come up from the southwest. That would bring milder air, but it would also introduce moisture, and hitting the colder air, at least for a time, that could also then bring some wintry weather, some snow. So this is the most likely scenario for next week. As I say, that high pressure will hang on, but we do have to keep our eyes on where we're going to see some injection of moisture, potentially therefore some snowy weather. So next week, when we look at computer models, we often look at these things. When we run them many, many times, these are called postage stamps. Now, a couple of days ago, there was much more uncertainty about whether that milder air would push in from the Atlantic. But the most recent runs, this is from the European model, only have one or two that push the milder air in by the time we get to the back end of next week. Most of them are now keeping things pretty cold through next week, as this graph shows. This is another way of looking at those postage stamps for a temperature. This is for Birmingham. Dates going along the bottom here, and each of these little yellow and green lines represents one of those postage stamps, so one of the computer model runs. So obviously you've got a lot of variation in that, but you can pick out a definite trend here with the white line, which is the average of all of those computer model runs. And you can see that red line, which is the average temperature. This isn't the temperature of the surface, it's a little higher up in the atmosphere, but it gives you a flavour of the cold weather, which is likely to continue because that average is way below the average for the time of year. And there's only really one or two as we go through next week that actually even get up to that average bar. So that's a pretty strong signal that this cold air coming in through the weekend is likely to last for most of next week. A bit of a signal there as well by the time we get to the following weekend of things turning a little bit milder. But as you can imagine, by this stage there is a lot of what we call spread. There's still a lot of variation. But that's a pretty strong signal that next week is likely to stay cold for much of the week. The big question mark is, as I say, whether we see any significant snowfall, whether we get any injection of moisture to combine with that snowfall. So here's what we do know about next week. It is very likely to be cold, colder than it is now. When you've got that cold air in place, and when we've got other things coming together, that position of those low pressures, that does increase the chance of some sleet and snow. But the detail of where and when, we just don't know at this stage. And if any outlets tell you that they do know, they are just guessing. The main theme is to stay up to date for details as we go through into next week. We're talking about days 6 to days 10 here for this increasing chance of snow. So it's not unusual to not know the details of where and when we could see some snowfall. Of course, we may not see much at all. So yes, stay tuned for updates on all of that over the next few days as we head into next week. It is very likely, though, to stay cold. So are you ready for that? Might be worth just checking a few things. It hasn't been cold for a while. We haven't had a really cold spell, certainly not through much of February, so just worth checking a few things. And there's lots of advice from the Met Office and our partners about that if you search for Weather Ready through our website. Look for the hashtag also on social media. And speaking of social media, that's probably the best way to stay up to date. As I said, we'll have more details as we get closer to the time. And we're right across social media. We'll be the first to let you know when we know more details. And so please, as I say, stay up to date.